began to open up some other chambers to us that was inclusive of what God did. And the first thing Paul said was the fact that when God forgave sin, God also opened the door for intimacy, because it was sin that separated us from God. Now that sin has been taken away, we now have free access into God to have a relationship with him. And so Romans 5:1 said, being freely justified by faith, we have peace with God. The antagonism, the animosity that exists between us and God has been taken away. So a man now comes into intimate relationship with God. And the reason God opens this door is because when you dwell in the ambience of God, the presence of God has the ability to mortify the tendencies of sin. And so when God invites you into fellowship, the desire to continue in sin will die. And so when God forgave future sin, it was not a ticket for sin. It's actually because God created a system that will stop you from continuing in sin if you will embrace intimacy. And if you understand forgiveness, intimacy becomes natural, because gratitude will flow out of your spirit and you want to relate more with this God that decided to unconditionally forgive you. Number two, Paul revealed to us from Colossians 2:13. He said, we were dead because of our trespasses. However, when we were forgiven, he said life was quickened in our spirits. And so when God was forgiving us, you may call it pardon, but God doesn't see it as pardon. God actually sees forgiveness as quickening. So the moment God forgave you, he activated the forces of life in your spirit. And that life, we know, is what sustains the power to mortify sin and to mortify flesh. Because no matter how you desire to stop sinning, you can't stop. Because sin is a nature and sin is spiritual. So your resolutions cannot stop you from sinning. And so God knew that you will continue to labor in futility if you keep making decisions, because those decisions cannot affect something that has become your nature and sustains its root in the spirit. And so the only thing God will do to stop you from sinning is to go deep into your spirit man and activate the well of life. And the only way the well of life can be activated is for forgiveness to be credited to you. And so when God forgave us, life was activated. Your consciousness of forgiveness is what quickens that life that is in your spirit. Now, when that life begins to dominate you, that life now begins to constrain you. That life begins to restrain you. That life begins to mortify the deeds of the flesh. And so the desire to sin begins to die. And you now discover, as the life grows on your inside, a time will come where that lust you couldn't resist suddenly dies. It loses the power. Because Paul said, what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, he said Christ dying for us activated something that had more power than rules and regulation. And he said that thing is called the river of life. That river comes with a law, and that law is what stops you from sinning. But that law cannot be activated except as forgiveness is first of all credited. And so when God forgave past, present, and future sin, he wasn't giving you a ticket for lasciviousness. He was actually inviting you into the frequency and the corridors of life. And that life has the power to stop you from sinning. And so a believer who is living by rules will continue sinning. A believer who, however, becomes conscious of the benevolence of God through forgiveness will unleash a force in his spirit, and that force will mortify the flesh. And then number three, I said the reason God forgave was because he needed to activate power and authority against the demons and the princes that lure us into sin, because there was nothing you could do about demons. In the Old Testament, you will not hear anywhere that somebody commanded demons to go out. We didn't have authority over demons. The only thing you could do was to exorcise demons. And so when you bring a flute like David and you play that flute can create a vibration that will lure the demon away, but you have no authority to command demons. So spirits had few days in the Old Testament. But what God wanted to do was to bind the powers of the princes, because those princes are the ones that subjugate your will and force you to live a life you don't want to live. But the only way you can receive that kind of authority is to be restored back to dominion, because when you sin, you fell from authority. And so when God wanted to restore you back to authority, he had to forgive you. And when God forgave you, you mounted back to your throne. And so in Colossians 2:14 and 15, he said when Christ was on the cross substituting on our account, he said he was also deleting the record of sin. And he said when he deleted the record of sins, he spoiled principalities and powers, and he made a public show of them, and he triumphed over them. And so the moment that was done, Jesus resurrected from the dead, and when he entered where the apostles were, he said, all hail the King. And he began to speak to them, and he said, all power in heaven and on earth has been given to me. You now go in that power. They were walking with him before, not having the right to exercise dominion. But now that he's risen, anyone included in him has the authority to exercise that power. And so in the New Testament context, we now cast out devils, we rebuke spirits, we fight with principalities and kick them out of the scene for the will of God to find expression. So if a demon is trying to manipulate your environment, environment now, you can stand up and address that demon. You wouldn't have had that authority except as you were forgiven and restored to God. And so in forgiveness, God did not give a ticket for lasciviousness. In forgiveness, God invited us into fellowship so that his presence can mortify our appetites. In forgiveness, God quickened life in our spirit so that life can begin to regulate us and bring us to the place of sonship and dominion. And in forgiveness, God restored us to the authority that we lost, that made principalities to become lords over us, so that we can now decide the outcomes of our lives in our cooperation with the Holy Spirit.